I stopped having s*x with my wife unless she was sober, and now we're stuck in a loveless, roommate-like marriage, unsure of our future. My wife, 35F, and I, 35M, have been married for 15 years and together for 20. We have 2 children, ages 12 and 14, whom we adore, and we try constantly to provide them with the greatest possible life. Things have been difficult over the last 3 years. I recognize that our children take a lot of our time and resources, with school, band, sports, and extracurricular activities. I am aware of the toll it may have on marriages. However, for the last 3 years, my wife and I have had very little closeness or intercourse. We've been attempting to work on that aspect of our relationship, but the last year has been the most difficult, by far the darkest year of our marriage. We seldom spoke and eventually became roommates, co-parenting under the same home. It was gloomy and discouraging, prompting us to consider divorce. Things became so dark that the entire home turned dismal. We sought aid through individual and couples therapy, which seemed to improve gradually. We began having in-depth conversations about what our marriage looked like and what we hoped it could be. Then things got tougher. My wife told me she was no longer in love with me, but simply saw me as a best friend and loved me in a platonic way. This absence of romantic love was one of the reasons she did not want closeness or sex. I was astonished and devastated. I grew angry and unhappy, unable to understand why the person I loved no longer wanted or desired me. Things deteriorated again, and we were back at square one. One afternoon, I had a heart-to-heart with her, asking where the source of the problem was. Her reaction was, "I don't know." She admitted to harboring animosity against me but couldn't pinpoint the source. This provided little information into how to fix things, leaving me perplexed and frustrated. We've gotten to the point where she claims she has no sex drive or desire for intimacy. She claims she only wants companionship, implying a co-parenting roommate dynamic. I asked her what I could do or what made me unappealing, and her response was invariably, "I don't know." She admits to loving me, but it isn't the same. She's felt isolated for years, and marriage seems like too much work. Her primary emphasis is on the children, and my efforts as a co-parent are important to her. I'm at a loss and simply voicing my frustration. It's difficult to accept that the person you love no longer cares about you. I feel as if I'm only here to give financially and as a parent. When she talks about companionship, it appears that she is content with having a nice father for the children and my financial assistance. She has told me that she has no interest in intimacy and does not want it right now. She stated that the only way she could have sex was if she was intoxicated, which I find abhorrent and unacceptable. I told her I wouldn't be a part of that because forcing herself into intimacy with booze or drugs is unhealthy. To my surprise, this angered her and made her more aloof. Despite this, we are both very honest and open. We have never cheated and we have full access to each other's phones, emails, and social media, but we rarely check. I inquired whether there was anyone else and she denied it, which I trust. We gently searched each other's belongings and, as predicted, found nothing untoward. We've always been forthright, even about difficult things, so I don't suspect any wrongdoing or cheating. Is it wrong for me to decline sex when she's intoxicated? I'm solid in my viewpoint since drunk or high sex does not sit well with me. I have no idea how to help our position, and I am feeling increasingly frightened and frantic. We're both fairly young, healthy and attractive. We both have stable employment and are excellent parents. I'm not sure how our lives brought us to this point. I'd appreciate some outside perspective and advice on how to handle something like this. It feels terrible to be unwanted and undesirable by my own husband. I despise it. We did some swinging in the past, which was enjoyable for a bit. We agreed to stop and have determined that it is no longer a factor. When we were swinging, our marriage appeared to be in good condition. We informed our couples therapist to ensure that we were not overlooking a potential problem. I asked my wife if our swinging experience had changed her opinion of our relationship, but she responded no. Our swinging was always done together, and it was entirely sex-based, with no emotional or polyamorous elements. I believe her because she has always been upfront and honest, even when it is uncomfortable. Swinging was her idea, not mine, and I trust her when she says it's no longer an issue. It could be something she needs to discuss further with her therapist or during our couples treatment. Update 1. The term resentment has long been a central element in therapy. It's been eating me up inside, especially since my wife keeps telling me she has no idea why she is bitter or what's bothering her emotionally. I brought this up again with our therapist, and we spoke about how we'd been together for 15 years, married since we were 14 years old. We grew up together and welcomed our first child when she was 19 and I was 20. That dramatically altered the trajectory of our life. We lived in extreme poverty and faced several difficulties, with little social life over the past decade since we were too preoccupied with raising children. Our children, now 12 and 14, took up all of our attention. The therapist asked my wife a lot of questions about her emotions and 90% of her answers were about the kids. It felt like she was reluctant to say how bad things were at times because she may feel guilty or ashamed, as if it meant she regretted having children. I brought this up during the session, and the therapist pushed her to look at things from a more personal perspective, rather than just as a mother. This was an eye-opener. My wife stated that she was frustrated that we had lost out on so many life events. She was clear though, that she didn't miss out on other relationships, dating or partying, but she did feel like she had lost all of her friends. This was huge, as one of the most difficult aspects of our lives has been how secluded we've grown while raising children. I reminded her of the importance of friendships and how she should prioritize herself and her social relationships. For the past 3 years, we've talked about the importance of friendships, particularly with peers who can help us negotiate life's problems or just provide us joy. My wife always avoids this, despite her desire for external stimuli. Her children have always been the reason she hasn't invested in friendships or herself. At this point in the conversation, it was evident that many of her complaints were related to the children. I inquired whether she was upset with me because I got her pregnant so young, and she responded no. She admitted that it was illogical to blame me because it takes two to tango. I saw this as progress since it provided us with something to work on. We agreed to devote more time to nurturing friendships, both jointly and individually. Toward the end of the session, we addressed next moves. It was still unknown what would happen. I was forthright in asking my wife what her plans were. I had decided before the session that if she insisted on the co-parenting roommate scenario, I would turn 180 degrees and focus on myself. She essentially repeated the same thing. She doesn't want closeness or sex with me right now, but she loves me and feels horrible about not being there for me. As I said in my initial post, I brought up the brief swinging encounter and she assured me that it was not an issue. I agree with her, it was a mechanical solution to a problem that did not exist at the time. We tried it, agreed to quit and went on. I also mentioned additional life situations that could have produced animosity, but we didn't make much progress in determining the fundamental cause, which was frustrating. I immediately told my wife that I would not be okay with the arrangement. I informed her that I had done everything I could and that this matter no longer involved me or required any more action on my side. I was quite clear that I would not tolerate this dynamic and that I needed to be with someone who actively participated in our marriage, worked toward resolutions, and was interested in sustaining an intimate and sexual relationship. I made it plain that I was not going to be a convenience or just a roommate and co-parent. I told her that I loved her and wanted this to work, but that I would only stay committed to the marriage if she was as devoted. If she wasn't, I wouldn't continue in a relationship where my efforts weren't appreciated. I assured her that I had no plans to leave or seek a divorce, but if this dynamic persisted, divorce was unavoidable. Of course, there were tears, and the session ended on a gloomy, unhappy note. Nothing was addressed, and I left feeling discouraged, determined to begin the 180 approach as soon as possible. The 180 method necessitates maintaining distance while remaining cold and transactional, which is unpleasant, especially since this dynamic was already chilly and transactional. I started following the 180 tactics the same day, informing my wife that I would respect the roommate and co-parent dynamic without complaint, but she should know that I wasn't happy and would never be okay with it. I also told her that if she didn't want to put in the effort, I would stop working on it. She agreed and retired to bed. I began establishing distance, focused on myself, and keeping conversations brief and transactional. When she requested for assistance with personal matters, I declined, which surprised her. She was outraged, accusing me of being juvenile, but I emphasized that she was now accountable for her own life and difficulties. We didn't talk much during the next 3 days, just when absolutely necessary. During this time, she grew visibly concerned and stressed, but I resisted my natural want to console and assist her. She cried one night, telling me she was stressed and worried about me because of my indifference. I reminded her calmly that she had chosen this dynamic, and that I too was taking care of myself. It's been difficult to be cold and distant since, as I've indicated, I adore her and want to touch and console her. However, I knew this could be manipulation on her part to keep me in the friend zone, so I remained the course. Now, a week into the 180 method, I've noticed a lot of changes on her end. I believe she is coming to realize that I am more than just a co-parent and buddy. A few days ago, I texted her a bill breakdown and a 50-50th split on our financial responsibility. She was enraged, calling it out of left field. I said that friends split everything 50-50ths, and as her friend, I expected the same. This made me realize how much I'd been taken for granted. Her pleasure and convenience had been at my expense. I pushed on, reminding her that this was the dynamic she had requested, and that it was still a good deal because she would have to fund 100% of everything if she were on her own. To summarize, while the 180 method has proven effective in many aspects, I remain concerned about the entire issue. There have been numerous eye-opening experiences, some of which have been difficult to confront. However, it has generated renewed energy and attempts on her part. She's talking to me more, and while it's difficult to say no, I hope this continues as things improve. I've also seen that she's making more time for herself outside of motherhood, which is significant given that she neglected herself for many years. I'm glad to see her become more like herself again. My goal is that as we work on ourselves, our marriage will improve. It's impossible to predict where this will go from here. We remain courteous and friendly, which is a positive indication. Boundaries are established, and expectations are extremely apparent. Whatever the conclusion, I will be satisfied with everything that has been accomplished. We will continue with couples therapy until we either reignite our marriage or divorce. A non-biased third party serves as a witness and advisor during this process. No matter what, I will always love my wife, but I will not participate in a sexless, intimacy-free marriage because we deserve more. Now to the next story, story 2. Am I the asshole for making my son live with his mother, stepdad, and 3 step-siblings after he verbally abused my husband? This entire situation is kinda fucked and honestly I'm a bit heartbroken for my husband. Real names IDC, I'm Sean 37M, my husband is Zach 36M and my son is 16, not saying his name. I divorced my ex-wife after she cheated on me for the entirety of our marriage. That was over a decade ago. IDC anymore, son is mine already over and done. I met Zach when I was 28, my son was 7. Me and Zach hit it off instantly. I was finally in a place to start dating again and thankfully he was the first person I was interested in. We connected on everything me and my ex-wife did and a million more things. People say life has a plan for you, and honestly I believe it. I'd go through a million more divorces and be cheated on over and over if I ended up with him every time. One of the big things was my son. Zach was hesitant at first just because of the situation, but he wanted a family badly and I was excited for him to meet my son. After dating for a year, I talked to my ex and told her I'm introducing our son to a guy I'm seeing, told her it's serious and I see a future with him. She was happy for me. We have a very good relationship now. Just told me to tell her when I was going to do it so she could be prepared if our son had any questions for her when he visited next. Zach and my son were best friends. Did everything together. They loved playing Minecraft together. They spent hours sitting in front of the TV. I loved watching them. I was so fucking happy. The first person I found after my ex was this amazing. After about 6 months I asked Zach to move in and the rest is exactly as I've been describing. Amazing. My son started calling Zach his other dad when he was 10. Very sweet moment, which makes this hurt worse. Well, last weekend my son had 3 of his friends over. They were playing video games in his room and I just left to do grocery shopping for the week, so it was just them and Zach. I don't know how this topic came up, but things got very homophobic. My husband was sitting on the couch and I guess my son and his friends thought me, and he left, but it was just me. My son's room is connected to the living room, so if you're sitting in the living room it's not super hard to hear what's going on in his room if he's being loud enough. 4 teenage boys playing video games. One of them said how it feels having a F-slur, IDK if I can say it or not on here, as a father. My son laughed and said it was kinda shitty. They said my husband probably touched him when he was little and my son replied, he can try it now, he'll get his ass beat. So not even being a dick to Zach but now also threatening him over something we all know he would never do. They kept saying shit like, which one do you think takes it in the ass? Probably the F-slur, at least your real dad still likes women, just a bunch of hateful shit. My husband sat there listening to it all silently crying. Also Zach has spent a good 4 hours a day at the gym for the last 3 years, so IDK who's getting their ass beat, but it ain't him. I got home about 2 hours later to my husband sitting in his car with a bag packed waiting for me so he could leave but didn't want to leave my son alone. I asked what's going on, why are you leaving, and he told me everything. I tried to understand as best I could. I insisted he wasn't serious. He's just being a stupid kid acting tough with his friends, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Zach left and I went inside and went off on my son. His friends left and I spent a good 3 hours going back and forth with my son. At first he was very unapologetic and kind of agreed with his friends. I asked if he actually thought my husband sexually abused him when he was younger and he said no, but kids block those kinds of memories out, so really who knows. I told him to pack his shit, he's living with his mother. Info, his mom lives 3 hours away, which means new school, new friends if at all, less private space as he'd have to share a room with his stepbrother, etc. Just everything that you'd expect going from a single kid in a house to one of 4. My son instantly changed his attitude. He was crying, begging me not to send him away. He didn't mean it, he was just lying to seem cool to his friends. I asked why he doubled down when they left and he didn't have an answer. I told him to pack his shit, he's leaving in the morning. Called my ex, told her the situation and she agrees he needs something drastic. What he did wasn't okay at all. Fast forward to now and my husband is back, but he cries every night. Honestly it feels like he's mourning, which I don't want, because when you mourn you don't get over someone, you get as close to indifferent as possible to keep living your life without them. I don't want that. I want my husband and my son to have that strong bond I know they have and don't want them to throw it away over this. I don't agree with what my son did, but those accusations at minimum can ruin someone's life and at most end it. I'm disgusted with my son. He calls me every day and tells me he misses me and Zach and wants to come home. I stay strong on the phone, but after I break down and my husband tries to console me. Tell me my son can come back and he will leave, but no, I'm not doing that. I just don't know what to do. I miss my son. I miss coming home and seeing them spending time together. I've thought about therapy for him, but he said no. You can't force therapy on someone. They'll just sit there for an hour and piss away $400. I need advice. Relevant comments. The Book of Torment. I'd be contacting the parents of those 3 other idiots too. OOP. I did, told them what happened and why they came home so soon. Original plan was to spend the night over. They said they'd handle it and thanked me for informing them, but who knows if they actually did anything. Stoner Therapist 89, NTA. Therapist here, but obviously everyone is different, so take it with a grain of salt. Parenting is sometimes wildly difficult, and this is one of those times. You did exactly the right thing. There are so many lessons for your son to learn here. Just name a few. He needs to not only learn the consequences of his actions, but that some things truly cannot be taken back. 2. Trying to be cool by being an asshole for absolutely no reason will not end well. It will not only alienate the people who actually care about you, but the people who get off on being unkind will eventually turn on you too. 3. Most people do not get along with their step-parents, and he has been taking that for granted. Separately, if you let him back and Zach leaves, your relationship with your son will be forever altered, as well as your son's life in general. All the love Zach has for him and their connection can be repaired once he gets his head out of his ass. If Zach leaves, your son will know he ruined his father's relationship for the rest of his life. The guilt and resentment from that can cause huge problems later on in life. This can be worked on. It can be resolved. I strongly suggest making family therapy a requirement for moving back into the house with an LGBTQIA+ friendly therapist, who can get down to the root of how harmful this was and make him understand that. Individual therapy is also a great idea, but family dynamic stuff needs to take priority. Edited to correct names. Grimwall, this is great advice, but considering the man alleged he was possibly a pedophile, OP's husband clearly isn't going to risk his future on someone who is capable of being that callous. I wouldn't either. This is fixable, but it doesn't mean it will be. It's not any different if a blended family comes together, and the daughter accuses her stepdad of touching her. There was literally a post 2 months ago about this exactly. He moved out, divorced the mom, and refused to stop the divorce once she confessed her bio dad put her up to it so he could fuck with the mom. Kid thought dad would come back if it happened. Newsflash, he didn't. That said, everyone told him that his future wasn't worth risking it. Just because he didn't get a full-on accusation in a police investigation doesn't mean he should be asked to risk it. I'm saying the same here. Zach said he would move out if the son came back. I think we are likely beyond counseling, at least for a while, certainly not while he's a minor. There is hope in the future though, and this is the way. Neat Pen 6522, absolutely NTA. Your son is old enough to know what he said is wrong, and he also chose being cool to his friends over his stepdad, who has shown him nothing but love and support for more than half his life. Everything we say and do has a consequence, whether good or bad, and no one should be exempt from those consequences even when it hurts. It's the pain that teaches the lesson of how powerful our words and actions are. With that said, the consequences can be taken further to ensure that your son learns this valuable lesson. I think you and Zach need to sit down and make a list of things your son needs to accomplish this year while with his mother in order for Zach to feel comfortable with your son moving back at some point. Some examples. Volunteer in some sort of LGBT program for teens where he has to directly interact with them one-on-one. Counseling, a letter of apology to Zach and a separate one to you. A sit-down, probably over Zoom, with you guys, him, his mother, and her partner if she has one, where all his parents discuss how wrong his choice was, the real-life consequences to Zach that could have happened, how he broke trust with Zach, and so on. He needs to see all of you adults band together on this so he can get it hammered home that you are united in this. Anything Zach personally requires from your son in order to move forward. The harsh truth that things may never be the same with him and Zach ever again. His words permanently impacted that. Update. This will be long. Sorry. Not going to lie, the entire OG post was basically a disaster. I expected a few replies with only one actually being helpful, and then the post died. Didn't happen that way. So much back and forth and so much hate towards me being gay. I expected some, but holy shit. I was done with that post when someone suggested that me and my husband both abused my son sexually just now. Disaster. I thought living in bumfuck Montana was bad with the homophobic shit I deal with. As for the update, I spent the day yesterday with my son. A lot of people accused me of not taking his claim seriously. I did. The first 30 minutes of our initial talk when this all happened was about if he actually was abused. He said no. I asked again when I got here. I made sure to let him know there is no one I'd believe over him. He won't be punished for saying the truth if he was abused for not, but I needed to know. Again, he said no, he was never touched or raped by my husband. On to the questions and his answers. Why would you say something so dangerous? My son said he was feeling rejected by my husband since as of late he hasn't been spending nearly as much time with him. Which is true. A large part of my husband's life is my son. Zach tutors him, he coaches him in his sport, basketball. He goes on morning runs with my son, he used to drive him to and from school before my son got his car. They both share a lot of interests, and as a kid/step-parent dynamic they spend a lot of time together. Towards the end of last year's summer when my son was still with his mother's, my husband talked to me. He said he wanted to start spending more time apart, but not that kind of apart. He wanted to have more of a social life. He wanted to be able to do things away from us but not like separate, if that makes sense. He realized my son would be leaving for college in 2-ish years, and my son was such a large part of his life he didn't want to become depressed after he left with nothing to do. I agreed and said it was a good idea, and he had my full support as long as he still came home every night at a reasonable time and didn't let his relationship with my son suffer or anything. As of now, yes, it is different. My son doesn't need rides to school. He doesn't need tutoring. He doesn't do basketball anymore. Their hobbies are still the same, but my husband has been spending less time at home. It's not like he's gone all hours of the day and comes back at 3 a.m., but he has a healthy social life. IDK, how to explain it? Do you realize how dangerous it is to say something like that if it isn't true? He said yes, and he didn't think anyone was listening. He was just going along with his friend's shit. That didn't make sense to me, so I asked why he stood by his statement after I sent his friends home. He said he thought he shouldn't back down from something he says. Kind of like a ride or die. IDK. I told him that's fucking stupid and never do that, especially if he regrets what he said and it wasn't true in the first place. He said he knows he realized that when it happened, but he just couldn't stop himself from keeping it up. It didn't hit him that it was serious until I told him he's going to stay with his mother. Why do you want to be friends with people that talk so much shit about your parents? He doesn't want to, but the kids bully the shit out of everyone they don't like, and he feels like he's in too deep to back out now. I do understand, I had kids in my school like that. Bully everyone. They were cool to me though until they found out I was gay, then they fucked my last few years of high school up. I told him I get it to some degree, but he doesn't have to add into what they're saying. Small chuckle and a fuck you is usually enough to get people to move on from something. I also asked about them bullying him because they kind of were. He said yeah, but they're not that bad with it. They just rip into him every so often about having gay dads, and I guess over time it made my son feel poorly towards my husband. The distance my husband was setting with my son mixed with his friends saying the shut they did just added up to that. I told him I understood. I want to make it clear, I don't support what he said. I understand the emotions behind it though. Why didn't you talk to us about how you were feeling? He said he didn't want to start anything. My husband and he are still close. He didn't know how he felt and was more confused than anything. So why say something that would cause a fight if he didn't even know if he felt that way? I also understood this. At this point I think this is just one miscommunication after another. Open dialogue would have prevented all of this from happening. There were a lot more questions, but me and my ex ended with, do you actually feel remorseful for what you said, or are you just tired of sleeping in the same room as a 7-year-old? He's actually remorseful. Told me even if he was staying there all year he would still feel terrible over what he said about Zach. Reassuring him again if anything did happen, now is the time to speak and I will believe him again. He said no. He started crying saying he just missed us. Emotional moment, we hugged, told him I loved him and that would never change. Asked him to leave the room so me and his mother could talk. We decided on a month-to-month assessment to see when he would get privileges back, ending with him coming home. There were conditions to all of this, like family therapy, solo therapy, cutting his friends off completely, which I would help with. He was against the solo therapy but came around. He asked if Zach was here. I said no, but would ask him if he wanted to come next time, which my son smiled at. I still agree sending my son to my ex-wife's was the right move. A lot of people aggressively disagree. Which is fine. My parenting style isn't for everyone. One of you told me I should beat the kids up though, so like, do I really care if some of you disagree with how I patent IDK? Not really. Situation still sucks. IDK, what to say? I miss my son. He isn't coming home right now and I wish I was leaving her house with him. As it stands right now, son is living with his mother and her family. He will get his phone and PS5 and car back at the end of the first, second and third month. In that order, he will be able to move out of the room he's currently in, out into the guest house at the end of month 4. Every month after that is touch and go, and we'll discuss at the end of each month what we think son will do. Bi-weekly solo therapy, and we will all do bi-weekly family therapy. We see it as he should do solo therapy one week, then family therapy the next. He can come back sooner. I want him back. My husband wants him back. He's wanted him back since he left. His mother is holding strong, but she also sees he's just miserable, so I think she'll break at some point and give up the guest house early. It is what it is. At the end of the night, my son asked if Zach would want to hear from him so he could apologize, and I told him yes. I've told him yes a few times now. Zach would love to hear from him. I doubt he'd have to wait longer than one ring before Zach picked up. My son called him as I was leaving, so I know they spoke. IDK about what though? When I got home, Zach was feeling like shit and blaming himself more for all of this. I told him it's no one's fault, we just needed to talk to each other more. All in all, I think my son is remorseful and he was just feeling trapped and isolated in a shitty situation and didn't know how to get out of. I feel for him and I wish I saw what was happening sooner. Thank you all for the advice. Or most of you. Some of you were just nasty and hateful. Someone on my first post called Stoner Therapist, something like that, gave good fucking advice. I didn't say it on that post, but if you read this good shit, thanks for it. Next update will be when he comes home. Hopefully it will be soon. Thanks y'all. Relevant comments. Scary Cycle 1508. I think my last verdict was NTA, so I can only reiterate that I do think you did the right thing. You removed your son from a situation that wasn't just hurtful to your husband, but also to your son, because the influence from those other kids was just disgusting. Also to your husband. It's definitely not his fault. He is doing the smart thing, developing a social life for when your son is off to school. Did you talk to your son about why Zach was spending less time at home? Did he understand that it was so he wouldn't be as miserable once your son is out of the house? Avocado_Mr. 284. With what Zach did, the issue isn't that he chose to develop a social life. That's smart of him. The issue is that he pulled away from this kid he had a very close parental relationship with, and gave him no warning or explanation. That's going to make any kid insecure and unhappy. Sure, OP could have explained this to his son, but honestly, in a perfect world, since Zach and the son were so close, he would have done this himself instead of being shielded by OP, and would have known to do this. Both OP and Zach did screw up here. Not on a massive level, to be clear. Just the ordinary kind of screw up which all parents, even the excellent ones, make at some point. It just sucks that it spiraled here, but I do think the bullying and discriminatory environment at school is more to blame than this mistake. Revolutionary Cow 7961. What your kid did is horrible, not gonna sugarcoat. But what your husband did and you allowed was bound to backfire. Who the hell ever heard of pulling away from your kid because he'd be going to college in a couple of years? And your husband didn't want to feel sad because he would miss him so much when he left. For God's sake, your husband needs to grow emotionally. Way to cause your kid to have a breakdown because he suddenly feels unloved and doesn't know why. I'm sorry, what the kid said was reprehensible, but if anyone is to blame here, it's the parents for being idiots and thinking this would ease your husband's feelings of loss because the little boy is growing up. He basically abandoned the kid with no explanation and pulled away. What did you think the end result would be? Consider yourself lucky he didn't go hog wild. Bad kid. I'm sorry this comes across as mean, but I just can't get over doing this to a kid. Prompt No 2857. This is one of the most extreme punishments I've ever heard for a kid's first offense. This kid was getting teased because of his parents and was never coached on what to say. And now they are punished for 4 months because a parent overheard and didn't realize the child was a victim too. OOP, I never said this was his first offense. Most recently he asked a girl out, she said no, so he and his friends egged her car. This is his first offense, as in accusing someone of assault when it wasn't true, but I feel like that's a pretty serious thing to do and not common, so IDK. I doubt he will be gone for 4 months. Prompt no 2857. He didn't accuse Zach of abuse. He was deflecting so he wouldn't be ridiculed. He was in a position he wasn't prepared for. I know you don't want your son ridiculed and teased about being gay at school because that's likely what would have happened if he took up for Zach. Now, for egging someone's car, that's a physical, not just words among friends, and deserves a harsher punishment because that's assault and vandalism. Mighty fine hotcakes. Thank you, stoner therapist from a fellow psych graduate. My comment was very blunt in saying y'all need to do the hard thing and go to therapy. Good job on being parents. It'll take time, but it will be time well invested for the well-being of your family. Stoner therapist 89, reading the feedback on my post was so interesting. Gotten everything from being called a hero to, you're the worst therapist in the world. So as I said, very interesting. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.